The Esperance region is home to some of the oldest and most unique historical buildings in Western Australia. These buildings tell of the dramatic change that the colonial period brought to the land. Stories of community and conflict, tragedy and hope, and stories of survival in some of the most unlikely places. Nestled amongst sandhills, overlooking the sparkling water and white sands of Esperance Bay, a simple limestone building, made from rock quarried nearby, was established by the Dempster family. It was the first outpost of colonial Western Australia in the southeast, growing to become the bustling command centre of a vast pastoral estate. The oldest building in Esperance, this stately home serves as a lasting reminder of the Dempster brothers' determination to leave their mark on this landscape and their significant role in the founding of the town of Esperance. Captain James McLean Dempster had run away from his home in Scotland as a 14-year-old to become a sailor. He came to Australia on board the Eagle in January 1830, along with the woman who would become his wife, Anne Pratt, and her family. After they married, James McLean and Anne had 4 sons: James, Charles, who was known as Edward, Andrew, and William, the Dempster brothers, and 3 daughters, Annie, Jane, and Marion. They lived in Northam on a homestead called Buckland, which was established by Anne's father and later inherited by James McLean. When the Dempster brothers were old enough, they formed a partnership and began to look for more land that they could lease to start their own pastoral property. At the time, the Western Australian colonial government was offering generous leases in the remote area to the east of present-day Munglinup. In 1863, Edward, Andrew and William Dempster set out with a group of men on an exploratory journey from Albany with a Nyungar guide. They sailed to Bremer Bay, then travelled on horseback along the coast, looking for fertile soil and abundant water, camping at rivers, creeks and swamps along the way, before passing Esperance Bay, where there was more grass than had been seen throughout the journey. They continued travelling east to Israelite Bay, then turned inland towards Mount Ragged, before heading home via an inland route. The 3-month expedition revealed Esperance Bay to be the most suitable land. Located on Wudjari Nyungar land, Esperance Bay was named after one of the ships in Admiral Brunei d'Entrecasteaux's French expedition that explored the area in 1792. The Recherche Archipelago was named after the other ship in the expedition. Doc Reynolds is a Wudjari elder and senior cultural advisor.
The land to which all of these settlers came to is in Wudjari country, which is the most eastern of the Nyungar nation, and in our particular area we call it Kepakil, where the water is like a boomerang. Boats sailed past here for a couple hundred years before the Dempsters rocked up. We know that when the ships and that first came, people got frightened. They just ran away, and some would sit up on the ridges around Esperance. They could look across the bay. They just seen them coming and they seen them going. And of course we weren't violent people in a sense. So when the Dempsters came, so they thought, oh well, they're not going to do much. But they didn't realise the impacts.
The Dempster brothers applied for land in the area and were granted 100,000 acres at Esperance Bay and 100,000 acres at Lort River to the west of Esperance. In 1864, they began to bring stock to their new lease, successfully bringing 518 sheep, 80 cattle and 19 horses overland from Northam, through land that was mostly unsurveyed and entirely without roads. Edward and Andrew Dempster stayed on to manage the new lease at Esperance Bay, first building a simple cottage on the Dalyup River. They didn't like the site of the original house and decided to move closer to the coast, to a site that was described as a pretty spot at the entrance of Esperance Bay, with a beautiful view of the bay which is 20 miles across, a good landing and a capital harbour. The bay seems almost landlocked with islands. Andrew says it is so cool there that Edward sleeps under 5 thicknesses of blanket and 2 oilskin coats. The brothers took it in turn managing the new pastoral lease at Esperance Bay, travelling overland between there and Northam. In 1867, Edward Dempster married Maggie Taylor from Albany, sister of Campbell Taylor, who later established Linburn Station at Thomas River. Later the same year, Andrew married Emily Marsden, a school teacher and stepdaughter of the Reverend Charles Clay, an exceptionally cultured young woman. Soon after Andrew and Emily's wedding, they set sail for Esperance on a small coastal ship filled with provisions and some furniture for their future home. Work started on the house that would become Dempster Homestead in 1867. The building was done by the brothers, supervised by James, who was clever with tools and of an inventive turn of mind. In 1868, a second room was added to the stone house, with the limestone blocks quarried nearby to the building site. Emily and Andrew were living in the 2-roomed homestead when their first child, James, was born on the 1st of July, 1868. The Dempsters' flock of sheep fared well at Esperance, and they soon had 5,000 sheep, 150 cattle, 24 pigs and 20 horses in the area. They leased more land around the area, as well as some at Fraser Range. They cut a track through to the range and were rewarded for their efforts with a grant of 500 acres freehold land from the Governor. They also dug wells and a dam at Fraser Range. By 1873, the Dempsters employed 8 shepherds to tend their sheep, including Benjamin Hannett and Lawrence Sinclair. The Dempsters also employed around 25 Wudjari people as shepherds and workers around the homestead and on their Fraser Range runs. The Indigenous workers and trackers played a vital role in the Dempsters' pastoral success. Annie Dabb is a Wudjari elder with deep ancestral ties to Esperance.
I can trace my family right back for years and years before the white man came. Great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather and my grandfather. So that's 3 generations that worked for the Dempster brothers. But before that, it goes back even further in Esperance. So you've got great-great-grandfather, then you have his son, Jumbo, or the white man give him Sambo, looking after sheep out at Fraser's Range with the other Aboriginal people. And then you've got my grandfather, his Aboriginal name was Dubbangal. White man couldn't say it, so he gave his the name of Joe. My grandfather used to go out and look after the sheep, make sure the wild dingoes didn't come and drag them off, or any other tribes come and spear the sheep, take them for food.
On one occasion, Annie's great-grandfather, Sambo, saved Andrew Dempster's life when the men were out tracking an Aboriginal shepherd who had taken a rifle and some rations and run away.
So my great-grandfather and his brother, they tracked him along, and then my great-grandfather spotted him in the bush. He was pointing the rifle straight at the Dempster brothers on his horse and shouted out, "Look out, boss, he's pointing a rifle, he's got a rifle at you." When he fired the shot once at Dempster and he nicked him. And then he turned the gun towards my great-grandfather because he told the white man where he was and shot him and killed him.
In 1873, the Dempster's two-room stone homestead was extended, with a second half added alongside the original building. In 1875, a large two-storey stone woolshed was built near the beach to accommodate shearing and to store the Dempster's wool. The walls were limestone and 2 feet thick. The lower floor was for shearing and stowing bales of wool, heavy gear and bundles of skins. The upper floor housed the family stores and all the goods available for purchase by the labourers and travelling public. A rail track went from the woolshed to a wooden jetty. The shepherds would come in from the outstations, and there would be a great atmosphere at the homestead as letters from family members were read and workers caught up with each other. The shepherds would often go months at a time without seeing anyone except for the workers who would bring them their monthly rations. So this was a greatly anticipated connection to the outside world. In 1875, Andrew Dempster took his growing family back to Northam to manage a new property the brothers had purchased there. By this time, he and Emily had 4 children. Ben Hannett, long-time stockman for the brothers, was left to manage the operations in Esperance. He was to receive £60 per year for his efforts. Lawrence Sinclair was to stay on and help Hannett in his role as overseer. A few years earlier, work had begun on the telegraph line, a small miracle of modern communication which would connect Perth and Adelaide. And by 1876, the line had reached Esperance. The Esperance telegraph station was opened on the 7th of September, with the first official telegraph sent from Edward Dempster to his sister Annie Gull in Guildford. While building the line to Esperance, the well-known Aboriginal guide and explorer Tommy Windich contracted pneumonia. Tommy had been on several exploring expeditions with the Forrest brothers, explorers and surveyors who opened new routes and surveyed land across the state. Caroline Hannett, Ben Hannett's wife, nursed Tommy, but sadly he died and was buried in Esperance. The Forrest brothers organised a headstone for his grave. From the time they moved into the region, the Dempsters attempted to impose British law on the Wudjari people who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. The brothers had been warned by the British colonial officials that they must be particular not to interfere improperly with the Aboriginal inhabitants of the country, and in no case to use more violence than may be necessary except in actual self-defence. The reality was far different.
Once the colonisation started to take its effect and the reducing of the Aboriginal way of life, then that's when conflicts, it's much easier to catch a sheep and eat than to catch a kangaroo. So, to them it was a feed. They didn't see it as a crime, but to a white man, it was money. There's a number of islands in the archipelago that we used as prisons. The people that constantly were breaking the law, drinking alcohol, being drunk and disorderly and what have you. They were placed on islands. If you sold me alcohol, back in those days, that was a criminal offence for you and a criminal offence for me for receiving it. But the black fellow always ended up in the trouble.
As well as using the local islands as prisons, the Dempsters had some of the Aboriginal people who stole rations or killed sheep tried in the colonial courts and sent to the prison on Rottnest Island, where they faced terrible conditions.
I think back how they lived, and I feel sad for them, and just thinking of what they went through, because they were tribal people and they didn't know why the white man was flogging them with a whip or locking them up, because they were a carefree people, walked and roamed around, and then all of a sudden you're living by the white man's law. They would have tried to fight, but what's the use against guns and whips and horses chasing you down? So they had to live with it or get killed. So to save their families, they would have just went along and, yeah, we'll come and do your work. They worked for rations, not for money like nowadays. They would give them, oh, this is your ration, you get a new pair of boots today. Or you get a bag of flour. That was payment for them. Whereas now we go out and work for big money, hopefully.
The Wudjari people were also impacted by diseases that were new to them, such as a plague of measles that went through the region in 1883.
But because the Aboriginal people didn't know what's happening to them and why they're so hot all the time and sweating, what they did is they ran towards the beach and jumped in the ocean to cool down. The Dempster brothers put up tents down near the beach to help with the measles epidemic.
Andrew and Emily Dempster attempted to care for the sick Indigenous workers, but in her book, The Dempsters, historian Rika Eriksson notes that many of them died. Andrew Dempster only stayed in Northam for 3 years before deciding to move back to Dempster Homestead in 1878. He travelled back by ship, along with Emily, their 6 children, Emily's widowed mother, Granny Clay, who was living with them, and 2 girls who were employed as maidservants. Emily Dempster led a busy life in Esperance. She bore 12 children in total, although 2 of them did not survive infancy. She was responsible for educating the children, running the homestead, and helping with some affairs of the station, helped out by Caroline Hannett, Kate Doust, and Granny Clay. When the children were older, they were sent to Perth or Adelaide to continue their education. In 1888, Emily became very ill, and when Andrew realised that she needed urgent medical attention, he arranged to take her to Northam, travelling overland as there were no ships available and none expected for many weeks. Victoria Brown, current owner of Dempster Homestead, has been researching the history of those who lived there over the years.
Emily had need of her eldest daughter's help, for she had a secret fear of the pain in her breast. She was ill, she had breast cancer, obviously it got to the stage where she had to leave here, and so they put her on a cart. What I've read says that the children walked her as far as Dalyup, just out of town, and that was where they said goodbye to their mother, and off she went on what must have been the most horrendous journey from Esperance up to Northam, where all the Dempster family were from, where she was operated on, but it was too late. It had metastasised and sadly she died.
After Emily's death at the age of 48, Andrew stayed in Esperance for another year, unsure of what to do. He then moved to a farm near Northam that the family owned, which he renamed Muresque. Andrew's two oldest sons, James and William, known as Willie, aged 21 and 20 years old, were left to run the station at Esperance Bay until a new manager could be found. These two boys had grown up at the homestead and had a great affinity for the place. As a child, Willie had been saved from drowning at West Beach by Joe Dabb.
My grandfather would have been sitting on the beach watching, and then he noticed that young William was caught in like a riptide. And so, without thinking, he ran and jumped into the water and pulled him to shore and saved his little life. So he grew up with him and called him, he's my blood brother.
In 1890, Henry Bostock was appointed as the new manager of the Esperance Homestead, along with his new bride, Emma née Phillips. Emma Bostock was a regular letter writer, and when a ship arrived, she would stay up late into the night reading and answering letters in order to have them ready for when the ship sailed the following day. At one stage, she went for 19 weeks without a mail ship coming. When the gold rush started in 1892, fortune seekers began to arrive in Esperance in droves, as it was the closest port to the goldfields. This very quickly transformed the area, which at that stage was not even officially a town. As Emma Bostock related, the town became busy with men pouring into the goldfields. 400 men arrived on one boat, en route for the Dundas goldfields. There was no accommodation for them in the town, so they slept on the seaweed on the beach. They were a mixed crowd, and during their stay in Esperance, things were rather wild. Up until this time, the Dempster's homestead had been the centre of activity in the area. Goods were purchased from the small store on the property, and much of the employment in the region was provided by the Dempsters. The gold rush changed this sleepy little hamlet. Soon, shopkeepers began setting up stores to sell supplies and equipment to the miners. Shops, hotels and houses were built, and on the 15th of December 1893, Esperance was gazetted as a town. By 1895, there were nearly 50 stores or other businesses in town, including 2 newspapers, and the town's population was over 1,000, with many more passing through regularly. The population boom in Esperance was soon followed by a decline, as a railway line connecting Fremantle to Coolgardie was completed in 1897. Very quickly, arrivals in the town dwindled as travellers and goods were transported by railway from Fremantle rather than over the sandy tracks from Esperance Bay. In 1898, Henry and Emma Bostock left Esperance, and Willie Dempster again took up management of the property. In 1907, after the deaths of James Sr., William and Edward, the Dempster brothers' partnership was dissolved. The entire station was valued at over £21,000, $2.7 million in today's money. The Esperance land holdings were taken over by Edward's son, Charles. By the 1930s, the homestead building at Esperance was reportedly abandoned, and it fell into poor condition. According to an interview with Thelma Chadwick, who was the secretary of the Roads Board in the 1930s, Charles Dempster was in arrears with his payment of rates, and so the Roads Board, which at the time ran the civic affairs of the district in the absence of a municipal council, took over the property. In 1938, the 8-acre property on Dempster Street, along with the homestead building, was sold to Mr Stevens from Kalgoorlie for £132, around $11,500 in today's money. Stevens did some basic renovations on the property, turning the homestead into 10 flats, renting out rooms to holidaymakers from Kalgoorlie who referred to the building as Stevens Flats. By the 1960s, the homestead had once again fallen into disrepair. In 1966, politician David Wordsworth and his wife Marie Louise purchased the homestead. They engaged a local builder, John Crawley, who had significant experience working on heritage buildings, to do the extensive renovations. The Wordsworths wrote of the renovations, "It took 9 men nearly a year to complete. The walls were without foundation, and the stone, carted from West Beach, was only held together with lime mortar, which had been pit burnt on the site. In addition, the roof leaked and the floors were rotten because they were laid directly on the earth." The Wordsworths' renovations included removing the false ceilings and enclosing the cellar within an internal courtyard. They also built a new extension which consisted of a garage for 3 cars and 2 additional guest rooms with separate bathrooms. The couple installed a beautiful Art Deco chandelier as part of their renovations.
So this is the chandelier that's in the chapel room, and it is a most amazing piece. We always laugh and say it's of a bit of delusions of grandeur, you know, have you seen my light fitting? Designed in France in 1912, and there are 10,000 individual pieces of baccarat crystal in the chandelier, and she was put up in the foyer of what was then the Plaza Theatre in Launceston. And she hung there until the mid-60s, when the council in Launceston decided to develop the CBD, and part of that development meant the Plaza Theatre had to be pulled down, and it was sold to an undisclosed buyer for an undisclosed amount. And that buyer was David and Marie Louise Wordsworth. So all of the woodwork was crafted by local Esperance tradespeople and put in specifically to house this chandelier that there she has hung for the last 55 years. It's just a ripper. I absolutely love it. The other lovely thing about this room is, of course, the original window that went into the house, the chapel window. This room was where the first Church of England or Anglican service was held, because the Dempsters were Christians. That's what they used this room for.
The Wordsworths hosted many notable guests at the homestead, including several state premiers and also King Charles when he visited the region in 1979, as well as using the building to host exhibitions and community events. In 1967, the Dempster's wool shed was demolished, despite a fight by locals including Marie Louise and Anne Haddon, who padlocked herself to the gate of the property on the day of the demolition, but was unable to stop it being bulldozed. The homestead, saved by the Wordsworths' renovations from a similar fate, was heritage listed in 2008. Tom and Victoria Brown purchased Dempster Homestead in 2017.
Coming from England and having grown up with old things and old houses and rising damp and all that sort of stuff. I went in eyes completely wide open, knowing that a house like this was going to have issues that were going to cost a lot of money to resolve or to try to resolve. Anyway, I said to my husband, "Oh, doesn't this sound a great idea?" And the pause was a little too pregnant and a bit too long. And he said, well, long and the short of it is he said, "Okay."
Since they purchased the building, Tom and Victoria have continued to renovate the building in a sensitive manner that preserves and emphasises the historic detail of the homestead.
Big challenge, but it's been a lot of fun. And it's a beautiful house to live in. It's just, I feel like I've waited all my life to live in this house. Really, I just feel so comfortable. I touch the walls sometimes, just sort of to feel the people who've been here before.
Dempster Homestead, once the centre of life at Esperance Bay, is still a much loved and valued icon for the people of this area, tucked away on a beautiful property in the very heart of Esperance.
That's what I like about this house, it's telling all the stories. One interesting story, Ned, that's my grandson, I put him to bed in his room one night and he was nearly 3 and the room was dark, just the light spilling in from the room next door, and he said to me, "Glammy, who's that lady standing in the corner over there?" And I looked into the dark part of the room and I said, "What are you talking about? There isn't anyone there." And he said, "Yes, who's the lady standing over there in the corner?" And I just thought, I don't know. So I didn't ask him, "What's she wearing?" I wish I had now, but I didn't. And I said, "No, it's nobody's. There's nothing there, darling. You know, no, kiss him and go to bed." And it was only afterwards that I thought, whoa. So we'd never had conversations about ghosts or spirits, or never had that conversation. What did he see? Don't know. I like to think it was maybe Emily. She had 10 children. And I like to think that she's still here, just, you know, looking after the place in some way.
The Dempster family undoubtedly changed the face of this region, and their legacy can be seen throughout Esperance, with the many streets and landmarks that were named for them. A legacy that contains both acts of courage and determination, and cruelty and destruction. This beautiful homestead bears witness to the lives that were lived here, and the people who have loved Esperance and made it their home throughout our past. It is a memorial to those who lived and toiled here against the odds. Thanks to the Wordsworths and the Browns, the Dempster's beautiful homestead will be here for generations, an icon of Esperance's past.